only thing that exists is consciousness. We can experience the emptiness because emptiness shows itself as the appearances that arise when we wake up in the morning. When we wake up, we arise, we appear out of emptiness. That means we are empty. Emptiness shows itself as emptiness in several visible forms. The forms are empty themselves, and we are programmed to see it as a special event or happening or visual forms different from other forms. So it is the mind that fills it up, which is empty by itself. The mind is the one player. It fills up what is not to be filled, what is empty. Emptiness shows itself as forms, which have the form they have taken it and used it from emptiness. So it is, as a matter of fact, empty forms, because they have no substance. That which is empty has no substance, and still it is visible as all colors we see around and floating around, and appearances that we make manifest by our mind. Mind makes it special, and so we are stuck. But we are not stuck to that special form, we are stuck to emptiness. And that's what the mind cannot accept. Mind itself is empty, but it cannot accept it. It fills itself with billions of floating forms and name it and separate it from other forms that float around. But it is all emptiness that you see. There's nothing under it. There's nothing holding it. It's not supported by anything. Everything is empty. You are empty, and that is the greatest bliss, because you were first believing that it was not empty, it was heavy stuff that you had to deal with. But it is all emptiness. Emptiness is bliss, is happiness. See through the forms. What is in it? What is in the wooden table? It is not a vast, solid piece of wood. It is from the trees outside, and the trees have been cut and used to form it in the table, to use it. But when you look inside, there are all atoms, and there is space in between. So that's what scientists have discovered. But as a matter of fact, it is empty by itself. Like you are empty. The molecules and the atoms in you form and glue, are stick together, and they form a sort of body in which you can discover what you are. But it is, in fact, it's all emptiness. It is coming out of emptiness. It has seemingly taken that form, but still it is emptiness, and it will dissolve in emptiness. When the mind is down and willingly to accept that it does not exist. And then behind the mind there is this bliss, this state of bliss and ananda, because you discover your reality. It's the same when you say the word emptiness shows itself, or God shows himself, or the self shows itself. It's a matter of words, but seeing the meaning of the words, they are all pointing to the same one isness, the beingness. Beingness is empty. To be is empty. It's not special, this or that, or important that and less important that. It has no special meaning. It is what is. Emptiness shows itself in all kinds of visible forms. And that's the same when you say God shows himself in all kinds of visible forms, and the self being shows itself in all kinds of visible forms. It's not about the forms, but what is showing itself. What you can see through or by means of the forms. What can you see? We are lost in the forms. We name it and we prefer it and we disprove other. And so our emptiness is not empty anymore. Although it is empty, it is filled by our personal meaning. And then we are tied to that which is in our mind. And the mind is empty by itself. We fill it up with nonsense. I prefer this and you prefer that. But as a matter of fact, it's what we see is emptiness. We see only our opinion, but what we see is empty. It has by itself not produce or dislikes, or by itself it has not a special meaning. It is empty of that. So what we see is emptiness, and we see our real self, beingness, what is. Some call it God. Some call it light. Some call it the self. It's all mind-chosen words, or what they taught you. When you were a child, you had no prejudices and contra, and when you were a child, you were empty. Then the mind filled up with, and now we have to get rid of that, to be empty again, because we are empty. And so when we reach that free state, which has nothing in it but its own emptiness, then we can die easily. We can float into our source, which has not a special form or meaning. That's what meant by emptiness. All that you see is a form, visible, empty. It is empty forms that you see. It's beauty. It's perfect. It's, you see a bird in the sky. We call it bird and we call it sky, but as a matter of fact, it is emptiness in emptiness. It is freedom in freedom. It has nothing that can bind you, that can catch you and imprison you if you don't give it the opportunity. Don't give freedom the chance to change you and to chain you, because all is freedom, all is emptiness. God, light, love, the self. What you see is the greatest bliss you can ever see. The real self. You see the real self. No words, no meaning, no this or that. It's all there is, shown as it is. Be happy, be blissful, be empty. Do you know what silence looks like? It looks like nothing, not a thing, and which is not a thing, that is the self. Self is not a thing. We make forms and names and differences. For instance, you see a bird, well, immediately everybody knows what I'm speaking of. A bird is a bird. We need to call it names for being in communication. But as a matter of fact, when you see a bird, you exclude it from all that is. And when you see the self as bird, you see emptiness as bird, or God as bird. There are no limits, no borders to what you see. And still you know that is a bird, and that is a tree, and that is whatever you see. But if you see it only as that which you give it name, it's excluded and it is limited. But if you see it as God, as bird visible, or the self visible as bird, then the same self is visible as the tree where the bird sits on, or the meadow or the park, or wherever what you see. You don't see it excluding everything, but you see it all in one. Still there is the object that you see, so you can still point it to it and speak about it, and there is connection with others, but it is not separate, because you see it as God showing himself as bird. It is funny to slowly see emptiness in all that is seen. Emptiness, the self, God, light. Light shows itself as bird. Light shows itself as you. The self shows itself as you. God shows himself as you and as the neighbors. God shows himself as neighbors. Now there is no separation. Still you can see the difference, forms, various forms, but there is no struggle, no fighting, no fear to lose. It's a matter of transforming the view, how you see things. It's most important for the feelings of peace and bliss and happiness. See all as one. That's the love God gives us. It is one. The mind wants to separate because then the mind can control. Forget about it. It was just fantasy. You still enjoy all the forms, but you see them as one. There's only one God, one self, visible as all the things to play with. When you are aware that we have no content, that there is nothing inside, only the energy of thoughts in this mind, which doesn't exist itself, because how can you see the mind? Can you take it out and look at it? It does not exist. It's electricity, it's energy drifting, and you cannot see energy. You only can see what energy does when you put on the heating or the machine or whatever, you put it in the current, and then you see what energy does, like the wind. It is nothing. Wind is energy. You cannot see it. You can only see what the wind does when the leaves drift over the street. So it does not exist, as a matter of fact. Only the effect exists. But when something does not exist, how can there be an effect? It must be something so strange that we cannot catch it. It catches us. It takes us in the fantasy of the whatever. It's not reality. You are empty. You are empty of whatever. You have no content. There is nothing in what you are, because you are yourself something that came out of nothingness. When there is nothing, how can there come out something? It cannot exist. You don't exist. There's only, can you see it, for example, an emptiness, an empty sky with things floating by, little dots, and that's the content of your mind, the thoughts. Your thoughts drift in an empty sky. How can there be something important in that which is floating around there? And the thoughts are in this skull, which is empty. It's so amazing when we are so stuck to the form that we say, she's crazy. She says, I'm empty, I'm sitting here. I feel it. No, that's all the power of imagination. The mind has such a tremendous power that it makes you experience a body form and a birth and a death and a fear and hope and trying to read things and feelings of loneliness. That's all what the mind does, but the mind is just energy dots in the great vacuum of existence, because there's only emptiness. There is only emptiness. And as long as we feel and think we are this body, we have to deal with it and with the things coming out of these thoughts. You are stuck, but it's time to let go. Understand and see and realize that there is no content in what you are. There is nothing in it. It's so strange that we only can realize and experience and feel it when we are out of the body, when we drift away from this vehicle. But in a deep sleep, you might feel it when you, at the point that you fall asleep, you feel yourself falling away. And at that moment you can realize you don't exist. You did not exist in that body in the day. Then if you give that much attention, try to keep it away, the sleep. If you feel you fall asleep, that must be so strong. You must be so strong to keep yourself away from falling. You cannot help it because the mind is going. There's no mind when you fall asleep. So there's no mind power to keep you awake. And in the morning you are awake. There is no mind power that say, I will stay asleep. So what is the mind doing with us? We have even no control over it. It's the energy floating through all forms. But as a matter of fact, it is emptiness. It is just only emptiness. What you see is empty by itself. It's just energy. Stay free. Be free because you are free. The only thing that exists is consciousness. Consciousness is the play of God. It is His fantasy. So, when you think you exist only in a fantasy of God. It's not yours, that fantasy, that consciousness. It is not yours at all. You are the tool, the product of the fantasy of God, who split Himself. He divided Himself in a state of fantasy, and meanwhile He stayed the reality. And in this fantasy He played all forms, all movements, all happenings. He fantasized. And it is the fantasy that is showing game of consciousness, and you are part of that fantasy. The fantasy is not yours. You are fantasized yourself by your own reality, which has no form. As long as you think you are this person, you are in need. But as soon as you realize you are the fantasy of the great free state, that awareness which is empty, then nothing can happen to you. You are the fantasy of the Great One, the fantasy of God. You live in the mind, in the spirit of God. And God is that which is all. So you live on the stage of your own play. You can see the play and you can see yourself playing. When you look outside in the nature and you see all things passing by, birds and whatever, other people, flowers, you see yourself walking or sitting on a bench. It's all happening on the screen of your consciousness, of the consciousness of the God that you are. So you are, in fact, you are dualistic. You are the reality that makes up forms. And you think you are the form. That's your play. The play of the reality, the God. God plays, He is all forms. And the forms think they are real. We are, what you call it, figures in the play. And the thing now speaking and listening and understanding, that is the reality. That is the everlasting reality that knows all what is seen is a play, a fantasy. It is consciousness. It's consciousness of that one and not yours. But as you approach that one, what you are really, then it is your fantasy. It's like a rope that you can roll on, then it's small, and then you can lay it out and it's long. But it's all the same consciousness. It's so flexible. You are the one thinking and being played on the stage, and you are the one making it up. What do you prefer? Being the one on the stage, pushed here and there, and not knowing what you are, and feeling you miss something? Or do you want to be the one making it up? As soon as you surrender to that one, you will be home. The play goes on, but you will see you are just enjoying the play. You are that great being, enjoying the play of yourself. The only thing that exists is consciousness. You are conscious now of this consciousness, nothing more. You are consciousness of yourself, seeing, walking, thinking, sleeping, falling asleep, that's to say, not sleep itself. But then there's the real empty consciousness. And when you wake up, consciousness is there again. Consciousness of what is, what appears, appearances. It's all fantasy. Whatever appears is fantasy in consciousness. And the God in me says, it's not your fantasy, it is my fantasy. You appear in my fantasy, and you will disappear in my fantasy. Nothing will remain, because it's fantasy. And be conscious of that. Be conscious of that. Be aware that you don't exist, that you are empty. Empty of yourself and full of me. There's only me. Consciousness in you is mine. Dreamt of Sai Baba and Jesus, both a powerful force, close or inside, I don't know. But what Baba said, let's look at this fantasy. This fantasy that is played is mine. I am in all fantasy. All fantasy is mine. I am in all people. In some, I am half, together with their half. In some I am more, in some I am less. But in you, I am totally. You are empty, and I am full in you. That's what he said. And then I was thinking, but it's all fantasy. It's just not real. And he says, yes, this fantasy is mine. Where does that leave me? I don't exist. I don't exist. When I exist in his dream, in his fantasy. Oh, this is freedom, total freedom. Free of my own self and my thoughts and my feeling separated. I don't exist. It is pure God.